Inside Petak Island Prison, Russia's frozen isolation block. The prison in the lake. There are prisons built to contain danger. There are prisons built to punish. And then there are prisons built so far from ordinary life that isolation itself becomes part of the sentence. In Russia, few places carry a colder reputation than Petak Island Prison, a remote penal facility associated with severe confinement, harsh weather, silence, and some of the country's most difficult inmates. Surrounded by water for much of the year and ice in winter, the prison became known for what many former inmates and observers describe as one of the most psychologically punishing environments in the Russian penal system. No city crowds. No nearby streets. No normal horizon. Only walls, water, wind, and time. Before we begin, support Life Behind Bars by liking this video and subscribing to the channel. Your support helps us continue sharing deeply researched stories from the world's most feared prisons. Because Petak Island was not famous for riots or glamour. It was famous for distance. And sometimes distance can be its own weapon. What is Petak Island Prison? The name Petak Island Prison is commonly used online and in documentary discussions to describe a remote Russian island penal site associated with extreme isolation. Public information in English is limited, and terminology can vary depending on translation, media source, or colloquial use. Some references connect it to prison facilities in Russia's northern or lake regions where inmates were held in highly restrictive conditions, often separated from population centers. As with many prisons in Russia's penal network, precise operational details are not always consistently documented publicly. What is clear is that island prisons have long held symbolic power. Water limits escape. Distance limits visitation. Weather limits movement. Isolation limits hope. Whether known officially by another administrative name or by its feared nickname, Petak Island became shorthand for one thing: a prison cut off from the world. Why remote prisons exist? Russia has a long history of using remote geography for punishment. From Tsarist exile systems to Soviet labor camps and later penal colonies, distance has often been part of incarceration. Why? Because remote prisons create natural barriers. Escape becomes harder. Media scrutiny becomes weaker. Family visits become expensive or impossible. Transfers become intimidating. Psychological pressure increases. In a country as geographically vast as Russia, sending someone far from home can become punishment beyond the legal sentence itself. Petak Island reportedly embodied that tradition. Not merely imprisonment, but removal. A prisoner could be locked away not only behind bars, but beyond ordinary reach. Climate as punishment. In cold region prisons, weather is never just background. It shapes every hour. Former accounts tied to remote Russian facilities often describe bitter winters, frozen pathways, limited daylight, damp interiors, and wind that cuts through clothing and concrete alike. Cold changes behavior. Movement slows. Hands stiffen. Sleep worsens. Illness spreads faster. Outdoor time becomes endurance. Even if a prison follows formal regulations, harsh climate can magnify suffering. A short walk becomes pain. A broken heater becomes crisis. A delayed medical transfer becomes dangerous. For island prisons surrounded by freezing water or ice, winter can intensify the sense that the outside world has vanished. And when the landscape itself feels hostile, confinement becomes deeper. Isolation cells. Petak Island's reputation centers heavily on isolation. Some reports and prison discussions describe inmates being held in segregation units or highly controlled cells designed to separate them from others. Such confinement is often justified by authorities for dangerous, violent, or disruptive prisoners. But long-term isolation carries serious mental health risks. Anxiety, depression, sleep disruption, hallucinations in extreme cases, memory problems, loss of emotional regulation. When solitary confinement happens in a remote prison already cut off by geography, the effects may feel even more severe. A prisoner is alone inside a cell. Inside a prison. On an island. In winter. That layered isolation is what gave Petak Island much of its feared identity. The men sent there. Remote high-security prisons are often reserved for inmates authorities consider difficult to manage elsewhere. That can include violent offenders, repeat escape risks, organized crime figures, prison rule violators, inmates placed under strict regimes. Public reporting on specific prisoner categories at Petak Island varies and may be incomplete. However, facilities with reputations like this often become destinations for those the system wants tightly controlled. That creates a particular atmosphere. Fewer ordinary inmates. More hardened reputations. More security emphasis. Less trust. Yet even in such places, every prisoner remains a human being living under the power of the state. Life inside the frozen block. Morning count. In remote high-security prisons, routine becomes absolute. Former inmates from harsh penal systems across Russia have often described the day beginning early with counts, inspections, and strict movement control. At a place like Petak Island, morning likely began before sunlight mattered. A bell. A key turning in steel. Footsteps in the corridor. Orders shouted through the cold air. Prisoners stand for count. Beds inspected. Cells checked. Silence expected. In facilities centered on control, routine serves several purposes: security, discipline, predictability for staff, psychological dominance over inmates. When every movement is scheduled, autonomy disappears. Even waking up no longer feels like your own decision. And on an island prison where the outside world is already distant, the repetition of identical mornings can feel endless. Food, heat, and survival. Visual prompt. Steam rises weekly from metal bowls in a gray mess hall. Prisoners in heavy clothing eat quietly while frost lines the windows. In many severe climate prisons, basic necessities become central to morale. Food, warmth, dry clothing, hot water. If any one of these fails consistently, daily life deteriorates quickly. Accounts from Russian penal colonies over the years have included complaints about poor food quality, aging infrastructure, overcrowding in some institutions, and heating problems in certain regions. Specific verified public details for Petak Island are limited, but remote facilities often face logistical challenges. Supplies may arrive less easily. Repairs may take longer. Staff turnover may be harder. In winter, a weak heater is not an inconvenience. It is a crisis. A thin soup is not just disappointment. It is energy lost in freezing weather. Where comfort is scarce, small things become major things. A hot meal. A dry blanket. A functioning radiator. Inside cold prisons, survival is measured in basics. Silence between men. Not every prison is loud. Some of the harshest are quiet. In heavily controlled facilities, prisoners may speak little, not because they have nothing to say but because trust is dangerous. Who informs? Who reports? Who loses control suddenly? Who is listening? In prisons holding high-risk or high-control inmates, relationships can be cautious and temporary. A nod. A short phrase. An exchange during exercise. Nothing more. Isolation does not always require solitary cells. Sometimes it exists in a crowded place where no one truly connects. Petak Island's feared reputation likely came not only from weather or walls, but from the emotional distance between the men inside them. The guards. Every prison story includes inmates, but prisons are also shaped by staff. Officers in remote facilities may face long shifts, harsh weather, difficult populations, and isolation of their own. Some enforce rules rigidly. Some become numb. Some show occasional humanity. Some abuse power. In closed institutions, culture matters. If professionalism is rewarded, conditions may stabilize. If cruelty is tolerated, it spreads. Public understanding of specific staff culture at Petak Island is limited. But in prisons everywhere, the tone of daily life often depends less on written rules than on how officers apply them. A door opened respectfully feels different from one kicked open in rage. A medical request answered matters. A humiliation remembered lasts years. Power in prison is often exercised through small moments repeated daily. Winter exercise yard. Even maximum security prisons often provide some outdoor exercise time. But on a frozen island, recreation can become another test of endurance. Short periods outside in sub-zero wind may offer fresh air, movement, and relief from the cell. They may also bring numb hands, burning lungs, and exposed skin in severe cold. Still, many prisoners value yard time intensely. It breaks monotony. It allows sky overhead. It offers brief human contact. Even 10 minutes outside a cell can feel like freedom by comparison. That paradox exists in many prisons. A bleak concrete yard can become the most desired place in the institution. Because deprivation changes perspective. What free people barely notice, prisoners can treasure. Time stops differently here. In remote prisons, time can feel distorted. Outside, seasons bring travel, events, birthdays, movement. Inside Petak Island, time may have been measured differently. Counts. Meals. Inspections. Letters. Winter. Another winter. Prison psychologists often note that monotony can be as punishing as overt hardship. When nothing changes, memory blurs. Weeks merge. Years compress. Hope weakens. This is especially true in isolated institutions where transfers are rare, visitors are scarce, and scenery never changes. Water in summer, ice in winter, bars in every season. Escape, discipline, and the weight of distance. Why island prisons are chosen. For centuries, governments have used islands as prisons for one simple reason: nature becomes security. Water replaces walls in one direction. Cold replaces comfort. Distance replaces community. Weather replaces opportunity. An island prison reduces escape routes and complicates rescue attempts. Even if a prisoner clears the fence, the next barrier may be freezing water, shifting ice, or miles of exposed terrain. That is why island prisons appear repeatedly throughout history, from Europe to Asia to Russia. At a place like Petak Island, geography itself likely did much of the guarding. You could leave the cell. You might even leave the building. But leaving the island was another matter entirely. And when prisoners know that hope can erode before any attempt begins, the myth and reality of escape. Every notorious prison develops escape stories. Some are true. Some exaggerated. Some invented entirely because people want to believe no prison is absolute. Publicly verified details about escape specifically linked to Petak Island Prison are limited and inconsistent in English language sources. But the obstacles are easy to understand. Cold water can kill quickly. Thin ice can collapse. Search teams know the terrain. Nearby settlements may be sparse. A fugitive stands out immediately. Even where escape is theoretically possible, survival after escape may be the harder challenge. That creates a brutal reality. The prison sentence may continue even outside the fence. Because wilderness can capture what walls cannot. Discipline inside the walls. In strict penal facilities, discipline is often enforced through paperwork as much as force. Rule violations may bring loss of privileges, restricted movement, segregation, reduced visitation access, transfer to harsher conditions. Former prisoners from various Russian institutions have described disciplinary systems where minor infractions could carry significant consequences. Talking out of turn, refusing an order, possessing unauthorized items, conflict with staff. In a remote prison, penalties can feel magnified because alternatives are already limited. Lose recreation in a normal prison and life narrows. Lose recreation on an isolated island block, and it narrows further. The harshest punishment is not always violence. Sometimes it is one more door closing. Letters from the mainland. For inmates in remote prisons, mail can become lifeline, calendar, and proof of existence. A letter may contain news of children growing older, a death in the family, money order details, photographs, a promise to keep waiting. But distance complicates communication. Mail can be delayed. Visits can be rare or expensive. Family members may lack resources to travel. For prisoners sent far from home, emotional separation can become as severe as physical confinement. Many penal scholars note that family contact improves stability and rehabilitation. When geography destroys contact, punishment expands beyond the inmate. It reaches spouses, parents, and children living hundreds or thousands of miles away. On Petak Island, the mainland may have felt psychologically farther than it was on a map. The reputation effect. Some prisons gain power through conditions. Others gain power through reputation. Once inmates hear a facility is cold, strict, violent, or hopeless, fear can begin before arrival. That reputation can influence behavior. Prisoners may comply more quickly. Staff may feel empowered by the institution's name. Families may panic when transfer orders arrive. Whether every rumor is true becomes almost secondary. The myth itself starts doing work. Petak Island reportedly developed exactly that kind of psychological presence. A place spoken of as final, harsh, and far away. In prison systems worldwide, names matter. Alcatraz, Idx Florence, Black Dolphin, Evan. And in Russian prison lore, Petak Island became one more name carrying weight before the gate was ever seen. What distance does to the mind. Distance changes punishment in ways not always visible. A person in a city prison may still feel connected to ordinary life. Traffic sounds, nearby family, familiar language, court access, regular visits. A person in a remote island prison may feel erased. No city noise. No passing strangers. No reminders of normal life. Only institution and landscape. Psychologists studying confinement note that hopelessness often grows where future pathways feel blocked. Remote prisons can intensify that feeling. Even release may seem abstract when every day looks the same and the world feels impossibly far away. That may be the deepest power of places like Petak Island. Not simply that they confine the body, but that they shrink the imagination. Russia's penal legacy and the future of isolation. A long Russian tradition of remote punishment. To understand Petak Island, it helps to understand a much older pattern in Russia. For centuries, punishment and distance were linked. Under the Tsars, political dissidents and criminals were exiled to Siberia and other remote territories. Under the Soviet Union, the Gulag system expanded forced labor camps across vast isolated regions. Millions passed through those systems across different eras. Modern Russia's prison network is not the Gulag. The legal structure, historical context, and scale are different. But geography still matters. Remote colonies, harsh climates, and transfers far from home remain recurring features critics have noted in the post-Soviet penal system. Petak Island fits into that larger historical logic. If you cannot erase someone politically or socially, you can remove them physically. And in a nation this large, removal can feel nearly absolute. What rights groups have criticized? Human rights organizations and prison monitors have raised concerns for years about conditions in parts of Russia's correctional system. Reported issues have included abuse by staff in some facilities, poor medical care, overcrowding in certain institutions, use of punitive transfers, violence between inmates, pressure through prison hierarchies, lack of effective oversight. Conditions vary significantly by region, security level, and institution. Not every prison reflects the worst allegations. But remote prisons often attract concern because they are harder to monitor, harder for lawyers to access, and harder for families to visit. That makes accountability weaker. A prison near a city may face scrutiny. A prison on an island in winter may face silence. And silence can protect problems for years. Why governments keep places like this? Why maintain remote, high-control prisons in the modern era? Authorities often cite practical reasons: housing dangerous offenders, separating organized crime figures, preventing escapes, maintaining order, using existing infrastructure. Some states also argue that remote colonies reduce gang influence concentrated in cities. Those are real policy arguments. But critics counter that distance often creates collateral punishment. Families cannot visit. Lawyers struggle to monitor cases. Medical specialists are scarce. Oversight declines. The debate is larger than one island. It asks whether incarceration should focus primarily on control, or whether rehabilitation, transparency, and human dignity must remain central even for serious offenders. Petak Island symbolizes the control side of that argument. Men who return from isolation. What happens when someone leaves a prison built on isolation? Former prisoners from remote and restrictive institutions often describe difficult re-entry. Crowds feel overwhelming. Noise feels aggressive. Choices feel exhausting. Trust feels dangerous. Some struggle with anger regulation or emotional numbness. Others cannot easily reconnect with family after years of limited contact. Employment may be hard to secure. Housing may be unstable. If prison life taught only obedience and suspicion, freedom can feel disorienting. This is one of the central criticisms of extreme isolation prisons. They may control inmates while confined, but leave them less prepared for life afterward. A sentence ends on paper. Its effects often do not. Could places like Petak Island disappear? Around the world, some nations have reduced reliance on extreme solitary confinement or closed outdated prisons under reform pressure. Others continue to expand high-security detention. The future of facilities like Petak Island depends on politics, budgets, crime trends, and public attitudes toward punishment. If society demands toughness above all else, remote control prisons often survive. If society prioritizes rehabilitation, oversight, and humane standards, such places come under pressure. Russia's future prison policy remains shaped by broader political and institutional realities. But history shows this much. Prisons once considered permanent can close. And prisons once considered unacceptable can persist. Nothing about them is inevitable. The final meaning of Petak Island. Petak Island Prison became feared not because it was glamorous or famous in film. It became feared because it represented a simple and ancient idea. If you want to punish someone deeply, separate them from the world. Place them where family struggles to reach. Where weather adds hardship. Where routine erases time. Where distance becomes emotional as well as physical. Whether every story told about the island is accurate or amplified by legend, its symbolism remains powerful. A prison on an island in the cold carries a message before a single word is spoken. You are far away. You are under control. You are forgotten. And that may be the harshest sentence of all. If you found this documentary valuable, Support life behind bars by liking the video, subscribing and sharing it. Because some prisons rely on walls. Others rely on distance. And Petak Island was built with both.